It was June 1940, and on this former German airstrip in Berlin, a French plane pretended to land, but its real goal was to bomb Berlin, and it succeeded in doing that. This here is the story of the very first bombing of Berlin in World War II, a French affair.
The capital of Germany was subjected to air raids more than 360 times during World War II, mostly done by the British RAF and the United States Army Air Force. That and the savage fighting involving the Red Army in the closing chapter of World War II in Europe left the city for large parts in ruins. But the very first bombing of the Reich's capital wasn't done by either of those sides. By the time the first bombing of Berlin took place, the USSR and the US weren't involved in the conflict yet. It was France, and the bombing took place on June 7th, 1940. In a daring mission, a French pilot set out to bomb Berlin while his own country was overrun by the Germans. Who was he, and how was he able to fly so far behind enemy lines and bomb Berlin? By June 7th, the military situation for the Allies was very dire. The German attack against France and the Low Countries had commenced on the 10th of May 1940. Luxembourg was taken quickly. The Netherlands fell in 5 days. The Belgians, they fought till the 28th of May. Around that time, the Allies had started to evacuate their troops from Dunkirk. Hundreds of thousands of British and French troops had been pushed to the French port city. With the help of British sailors, many of these were evacuated to Britain and lived to fight another day. Meanwhile, other Allied troops in France fought on, and the Germans were getting closer to Paris. On the 3rd of June, German planes bombed Paris and its suburbs. Around 300 German bombers took part, destroying 16 French aircraft on the ground and 17 more in the air, damaging several rail stations and causing a large fire at the Citroën plant. The raid killed 32 military personnel and 195 civilians. The French were angry about this and wanted revenge, but how? The French Air Force was already in a lamentable state before war had broken out. Let's discuss the French Air Force of 1940. Why did the French Air Force fail at that time? Shortages of aircraft and pilots are often mentioned, but a lack of leadership and misunderstanding of how best to employ air power were the root causes. Although the German Messerschmitt fighter planes were faster than all Allied fighter aircraft, its speed advantage was often offset by the superior agility of its opponents. The French Morane-Saulnier MS-406 was the most widely used French fighter at the time, though it was considered outdated. 3 fighter groups were in the process of transitioning to more modern aircraft during the 1940 campaign. Despite its age, the MS-406 performed fairly well. The French bomber force lagged even further behind than their fighters in terms of modernization. The new Loiret et Olivier LEO 451 bombers were hampered by complicated mechanical systems and a lack of spare parts. The advanced Amiot models superior to the German Ju-88 had just begun production and didn't fly combat missions until June 4th and only at night. As with ground warfare, sheer numbers mattered less than effective use of resources. New Breguet 693 assault bombers were rushed into action shortly after receiving their bombs. However, French bombing units were generally held back, likely due to expectations of a prolonged conflict. The limited numbers of French bombers and their cautious use put extra pressure on fighter units. Without a radar network on France's eastern frontier, intercepting individual Luftwaffe formations was nearly impossible. French fighter pilots were left with the choice of ignoring the Luftwaffe or attempting to support ground troops directly. Patrolling to find German aircraft in the vast airspace was largely ineffective. With long daylight hours and an extended front, the odds of contact were slim. As more fighter squadrons were gradually committed to battle, French air activity gained momentum. Between May 10th and 21st, French fighters flew 2,675 sorties, an average of 323 per day. From June 4th to 10th, over 2,000 sorties were flown, or about 286 daily. However, this average concealed an uneven distribution of effort. Some units flew multiple missions daily, while others didn't fly at all. By early June, French frontline squadrons were receiving a significant number of replacement aircraft. Unfortunately, most of them lacked essential components and couldn't be flown. There was also a critical shortage of trained crews. This administrative chaos went hand in hand with confusion over how best to use air power. The French Air Force's tactical doctrine, formalized in 1937, spoke in broad terms about choosing whether to target enemy forces, infrastructure, or communications with or without army cooperation. General Maurice Gamelin, the commander of the French forces, believed air war was secondary. General Joseph Vouillemont, the Air Force chief, likely agreed, though he briefly considered reorganizing aviation into unified strategic command independent of the Army's defensive zones. The idea was never implemented. British observers often criticized the RAF's independence, contrasting it with the French Air Force's subordination to Army leadership. In practice, though, this supposed coordination rarely worked. That verdict may be unfair. With limited resources and poor coordination, the French Air Force likely had even less impact on the outcome than the Luftwaffe, but ultimately the battle was decided on the ground. The failings of the Armée de l'Air were a symptom of a larger collapse, not its root cause. But in one thing the French did not fail was executing their daring mission to bomb Berlin. On the night of the 3rd to the 4th of June, 2 Farman F.223 groups were ordered to bomb Munich, and 7 sorties were flown. The next night, LEO 451s joined 4 Farmans for a second attack on Munich. Retaliation against the German capital itself was left in the hands of the French Navy. Its sole Farman F.223.4 long-range reconnaissance bomber had a remarkable ability to carry 2,000 kilograms of bombs along the Channel, North Sea, and Baltic coasts, and then south to Berlin, because that's the route they took. See, the aircraft was very vulnerable for German fighters, as it had only one machine gun turret to defend itself. Captain Henri Daillière commanded the squadron of 3 bombers. One plane was named Jules Verne, after the famous French author, and was under his command directly, and thus they took on a long route. From Bordeaux, they flew over the English Channel. They kept low to avoid being detected and attacked by German fighters. Above the North Sea, they would turn east and fly over German-occupied Denmark. After this, they would turn south and hit Berlin. The goal was the Siemens factory. This mission was only possible because the aircraft had such an impressive range. When they arrived at Berlin, the city was fully lit. The German leadership was so confident the Allied planes wouldn't hit them that blackouts hadn't been ordered. At midnight, Daillière and his crew appeared over the eastern outskirts of Berlin. They fooled the German air defenses by pretending to land at Berlin-Tempelhof Airport. Berlin-Tempelhof Airport, which was opened in the early 1920s, had become one of Europe's earliest commercial airports and a symbol of 20th century aviation. Not functioning anymore as an airport today, as it was closed in 2008, the monumental terminal, built by the Nazis in the 1930s, was intended as a gateway to a brand new Berlin. Today, the area functions as a park to hang out and cycle around. It's a fun place which I visited last month. The French aircraft didn't land at Tempelhof and flew on and arrived above Siemensstadt in the west of Berlin. There, they threw out the bombs. Some incendiary bombs had to be physically thrown out by the crew. Searchlights and flight guns came alive, but the French managed to get out by flying low and via an irregular course. In the dark, no German fighters were able to find them. In the afternoon, the aircraft landed at Paris airport. They received a hero's welcome. In total, the French managed to drop 8 bombs of 250 kilograms and 80 of 10 kilograms on the German capital. The damage was minimal, but it left the Germans embarrassed as they tried to cover up the story of the very first Allied raid on Berlin. The raid was only a gesture, but this was all that was required. The next day, the French press were able to lift the morale of the nation with a slightly exaggerated account of how a formation of naval bombers had struck the German capital, and neutral embassies were certainly able to confirm an attack had taken place. After all, the effort that had gone into the creation of a bomber force capable of attacking the German capital, a single long-range bomber, and a naval one at that, was all that was needed to satisfy French honor. Shortly after, Daillière managed to bomb Rostock and positions in Italy, as Italy had now joined the war with Germany against France. France would surrender to Germany on the 22nd of June 1940. If you want to learn more on the German invasion of France, click right here. Thanks for watching. History Hustler signing off.